Life has a funny way of bringing people together when they least expect it. For Keisha Thompson, that moment came on a rainy Tuesday morning in April at the Riverside Physical Therapy Center. She had never planned to be there, but a twisted ankle from her morning jog had forced her to seek treatment. Little did she know that this small injury would lead her to the biggest love story of her life. Keisha was sitting in the waiting room, scrolling through her phone and trying to ignore the dull ache in her ankle. At 32, she was a successful elementary school teacher, known for her bright smile and the colorful head wraps she wore that matched her equally colorful personality. That morning, she wore a yellow wrap that seemed to bring warmth to the otherwise dull medical facility. The sound of laughter made her look up. A man in a wheelchair was talking to one of the therapists, telling a story that had everyone around him smiling. Keisha couldn't help but notice how his entire face lit up when he laughed, and how others seemed naturally drawn to his energy. His name was James Davidson, she would later learn, a 35-year-old software engineer who had been coming to the center for the past 5 years. During her first session, Keisha kept stealing glances at James, who was working with his therapist on the other side of the room. She noticed how determined he looked, how he never complained even when the exercises seemed difficult. There was something about his spirit that caught her attention. Their first real interaction happened when Keisha dropped her water bottle, and it rolled across the floor. Before anyone else could react, James had wheeled over and picked it up for her. "I believe this belongs to you," he said with a warm smile that reached his kind brown eyes. "Thank you," Keisha replied, suddenly feeling shy, which was unusual for her outgoing nature. "I'm Keisha." "James," he responded, "and judging by your ankle wrap, you're new here." They ended up talking for 20 minutes, completely losing track of time. James made her laugh with his stories about his job as a software engineer and his adventures with his specialized wheelchair, which he had named Lightning, because it was anything but fast. Keisha found herself sharing stories about her students and the chaos of teaching third grade. What struck her most was how easily James talked about his condition. He had been in a car accident 5 years ago that left him unable to walk, but he spoke about it without bitterness. Instead, he focused on how it had taught him to see life differently and appreciate the small things. Over the next few weeks, Keisha started looking forward to her therapy sessions more than she wanted to admit. She would schedule them at the same time as James' appointments, and they fell into a routine of talking before and after their sessions. The other patients and staff noticed their growing connection, sharing knowing smiles when they saw them together. One day, after her ankle had healed completely, Keisha found herself standing outside the therapy center, realizing she had no more reasons to come back. As she was about to leave, James wheeled out through the automatic doors. "So, I hear you're officially discharged," he said, trying to sound casual but not quite managing it. "Yeah," Keisha replied, shuffling her feet. "I guess my ankle's all better now." James took a deep breath and said, "Well, in that case, would you like to get coffee sometime? There's a nice cafe around the corner that makes the best chocolate croissants." Keisha's heart skipped a beat. She had been hoping he would ask, but had been too nervous to make the first move herself. "I'd love to," she answered, her smile brightening the cloudy day. As they made plans for their first date, neither Keisha nor James realized they were starting a journey that would not only change their lives, but would also challenge society's perceptions about love, ability, and what it means to truly see someone for who they are. That evening, Keisha called her best friend Lisa to tell her about James. Lisa was quiet for a moment before asking, "Are you sure about this? Dating someone in a wheelchair, it won't be easy." Keisha thought about James's laugh, his kindness, and the way he made her feel. "The best things in life usually aren't easy," she replied, "but they're worth it." As weeks turned into months, Keisha and James's relationship grew stronger with each passing day. Their first coffee date at the corner cafe had turned into regular dinner dates, movie nights, and weekend adventures that neither of them had expected would be possible. One sunny Saturday morning, 3 months into their relationship, James took Keisha to the local farmer's market. He knew all the vendors by name, and they watched with warm smiles as he expertly maneuvered his wheelchair between the stalls, with Keisha walking beside him. Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who sold fresh flowers, gave them a free bouquet of sunflowers, saying they reminded her of their bright spirits. However, not everyone was as accepting of their relationship. At work, Keisha often heard whispers from some of her fellow teachers. "She's such a pretty girl," they would say when they thought she couldn't hear. Why would she choose to limit herself like that? These comments hurt, but Keisha chose to focus on the happiness she found with James. James faced his own challenges with his family, especially his mother, Sarah Davidson. She had been overprotective of her son since the accident, and the idea of them dating someone seriously made her nervous. When James first brought Keisha home for dinner, Sarah spent most of the evening asking pointed questions about how Keisha planned to handle caring for someone with a disability. "Mom," James had interrupted firmly, "I don't need anyone to take care of me. I need a partner, and that's exactly what Keisha is." Keisha's family had their own concerns. Her father, a traditional Baptist preacher from Georgia, worried not only about James's disability, but also about their different backgrounds. James came from a Jewish family, and the cultural differences seemed like a mountain too high to climb for Keisha's parents. But love has a way of breaking down barriers. Everything changed during a Sunday dinner at Keisha's parents' house. The power went out during a thunderstorm, and while everyone was panicking, it was James who calmly used his tech skills to get their generator working. That night, in the soft glow of emergency lights, Keisha's father saw James not as a man in a wheelchair, but as someone who could take care of his daughter in ways that mattered most. Their relationship wasn't always easy. Simple things like planning dates required extra thought. They had to check if restaurants were wheelchair accessible, and sometimes their plans had to change when James had bad days with pain or fatigue. But Keisha discovered that these challenges only made them more creative and brought them closer together. James taught Keisha to code simple games on the computer, and she introduced him to painting, setting up an easel at just the right height for his wheelchair. They found ways to dance together during quiet evenings at home, with Keisha sitting on James's lap as they swayed to slow music in his wheelchair. 6 months into their relationship, they faced their first big test. James got sick with pneumonia and had to spend 2 weeks in the hospital. Keisha took time off work to be with him, sleeping in an uncomfortable hospital chair and helping the nurses turn him every few hours. It was during those difficult nights that she realized just how deeply she had fallen in love with him. One evening, as James was recovering, he looked at Keisha with tears in his eyes. "You know," he said softly, "most people would have run away by now. This isn't the easiest life." Keisha took his hand and smiled. "I'm not most people," she replied. "And easy is boring. I'd rather have a life that's interesting than real." Their love story became known around town, not because they were different, but because of how they showed people what true partnership looked like. They supported each other's dreams, James helping Keisha prepare for her master's degree in education, and Keisha encouraging James when he started developing apps for people with disabilities. By their first anniversary, both families had come around. Sarah Davidson finally saw how happy her son was, and Keisha's father admitted that James was the best thing that had happened to his daughter. During their anniversary dinner, surrounded by both families, James watched Keisha laughing at one of his jokes and knew he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. What he didn't know was that soon, he would plan a proposal that would change both their lives forever, and set in motion events that would lead to the most surprising wedding their town had ever seen. Spring had arrived in full bloom when James decided it was time to ask Keisha to marry him. He had been planning this moment for 3 months, wanting everything to be perfect. As a software engineer, he was good at planning, but this was the most important code he would ever write, the code to his future happiness. James chose Sweet Maple Restaurant for the proposal, the same place where they had their first official dinner date. But getting everything ready wasn't easy. He had to coordinate with the restaurant owner, Mr. Chen, his friends, and even some of Keisha's students from school. He wanted this moment to be special, something that would show Keisha just how much she meant to him. On the evening of the proposal, Keisha noticed James seemed nervous. His hands were shaking slightly as he wheeled himself into the restaurant. "Are you feeling okay?" she asked, concerned. James just smiled and said, "Never better," as Mr. Chen led them to their usual corner table. What Keisha didn't know was that every person in the restaurant that night was part of James's plan. There were their close friends pretending to be regular customers, some of her third-grade students with their parents, and even James's physical therapist, all waiting for the perfect moment. As they finished their main course, James gave a small signal to Mr. Chen. Suddenly, the lights dimmed slightly, and soft music began to play. "At Last" by Etta James, their favorite song. Keisha looked around, confused, when a young girl in a wheelchair, Sarah, one of Keisha's former students, rolled up to their table holding a large card. The card read, "Once upon a time, a teacher with a twisted ankle walked into a physical therapy center. Before Keisha could process what was happening, another person stood up from their table, holding another card, and met a software engineer who thought she had the most beautiful smile he'd ever seen. One by one, different people around the restaurant stood up or wheeled forward, each holding cards that told their love story. The cards spoke about their first date, their challenges, their victories, and their love that grew stronger each day. Keisha's eyes filled with tears as she read each card. She saw her best friend Lisa holding one that said, "She chose love over easy, and found both." She saw James's mother with a card reading, and showed a worried mother what true love looks like. The final card was held by Mr. Chen himself. "Now, this software engineer has just one question to ask." James took Keisha's hand, his eyes shining with love and hope. From his jacket pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box. His voice was shaking slightly, but his words were clear and strong. "Keisha Thompson," he said, "you walked into my life when I thought my story was already written. You showed me that life's greatest adventures were still ahead. You never saw my wheelchair as a barrier. You saw it as just another part of our unique love story." He opened the box, revealing a beautiful ring with a sapphire stone, Keisha's favorite color. "Every day with you is a gift I never expected to receive. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" The restaurant went completely quiet. Keisha was crying now, but her smile was brighter than any star. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." The entire restaurant erupted in cheers. Mr. Chen broke out the champagne he had been hiding. The children from Keisha's class threw rose petals they had been keeping in their pockets. James's mother was crying happy tears, filming everything on her phone. As James slipped the ring onto Keisha's finger, she leaned down to kiss him, not caring that everyone was watching. In that moment, they weren't a black woman and a disabled man. They were simply two people deeply in love, starting their journey toward forever. Later that night, as they celebrated with their friends and family, Keisha couldn't stop looking at her ring. "How did you plan all this?" she asked James in amazement. James grinned. "I had a lot of help. Turns out, when you find real love, people want to be part of that story." What James didn't tell her that night was that this proposal was just the beginning. He had an even bigger surprise planned for their wedding day, one that would leave everyone speechless. Planning a wedding is never easy, but Keisha and James faced unique challenges that most couples never have to think about. 6 months had passed since the magical proposal, and now they were deep in wedding preparations, trying to create a ceremony that would honor both their cultures and accommodate James's needs. The first challenge came when they started looking for a venue. Many of the beautiful old churches and halls that Keisha had dreamed about since she was a little girl weren't wheelchair accessible. Some had steps at their entrances, narrow doorways, or no proper ramps. After visiting 12 different places, both Keisha and James were starting to feel discouraged. "Maybe we should just have a small backyard wedding," James suggested one evening, seeing how stressed Keisha was becoming. But Keisha wouldn't hear of it. "We deserve our dream wedding," she said firmly. "We just need to find the right place." Their luck changed when they visited Grace Community Church. The church was modern, with wide aisles and smooth floors. More importantly, Pastor Michael, who reminded Keisha of her father, understood their vision immediately. He didn't see their wedding as a challenge, but as a beautiful opportunity to show that love knows no boundaries. But the venue was just the beginning. They needed to blend two very different family traditions. Keisha's family wanted a traditional Baptist ceremony, while James' Jewish family hoped to include elements of their heritage. Hours were spent around dining room tables, with both mothers offering suggestions and sometimes arguing over details. The breakthrough came during a tense dinner when James' younger sister Rachel suggested, "Why not have both? We could have a chuppah that's decorated with Baptist church flowers, and James could break the glass while the gospel choir sings." This creative solution opened the door for more unique ideas. They decided to blend traditions in ways that had never been done before. The wedding program would be written in both English and Hebrew. The reception would feature both soul food and traditional Jewish dishes. Even the music would be a mix of gospel songs and Jewish wedding music. Throughout all the planning, James was keeping a secret. 3 times a week, he would tell Keisha he had late meetings at work, but instead, he was going to intense physical therapy sessions. His therapist, Dr. Rodriguez was helping him with a special project, one that would make their wedding day unforgettable. One day, Keisha almost discovered the surprise when she stopped by James's office to bring him lunch during one of his supposed meetings. Luckily, his coworker Mark covered for him, saying James had stepped out for coffee. That night, James felt guilty about the deception but reminded himself that it would all be worth it on their wedding day. The stress of wedding planning started to show in other ways too. Keisha worried about everything being perfect. What if something goes wrong? She asked her maid of honor, Lisa, during a cake tasting. What if people are uncomfortable with our different traditions? Lisa looked at her best friend and said something Keisha would never forget. Honey, this wedding isn't about making other people comfortable. It's about celebrating a love that's strong enough to break down every barrier it meets. As the wedding day got closer, more challenges appeared. The first wedding dress Keisha fell in love with was too long and might get caught in James's wheelchair. The dance floor they wanted wouldn't work with the wheelchair. Even the wedding cake table had to be at a specific height for James to reach it comfortably. But for every problem, they found a solution. A talented seamstress modified the dress to be perfect. They designed a special dance floor that was completely smooth. The cake table was custom built to be just right. James watched all of this with amazement, seeing how Keisha handled each challenge with grace and determination. What she didn't know was that while she was planning their perfect wedding, he was working on his own special gift to her. Every night, after she went home, he spent extra hours practicing with his physical therapy team, getting stronger, preparing for a moment that would make all their wedding guests gasp in amazement. With just 1 week left until the wedding, everything was finally falling into place. But the biggest surprise was still to come, and it would be a moment that no one who attended their wedding would ever forget. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and beautiful. Keisha woke up early in her childhood bedroom at her parents' house, where she had spent the night following tradition. The sun was just beginning to peek through her old purple curtains, and she could already hear movement downstairs as her family began preparing for the big day. Her mother, Gloria, came into the room carrying a cup of her special chamomile tea. "Good morning, baby," she said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Today's the day you become Mrs. Davidson." There were tears in her eyes as she handed Keisha the tea. Meanwhile, across town at his apartment, James was already awake. He had barely slept, a mixture of excitement and nervousness keeping his mind active all night. His best man, his brother Michael, was staying with him and had called Dr. Rodriguez first thing in the morning to confirm everything was ready for their surprise. Back at the Thompson house, the bridesmaids arrived early, filling the house with laughter and excitement. Lisa, the maid of honor, took charge immediately, organizing everyone according to the schedule she had carefully planned. The makeup artist and hairstylist set up their equipment in the living room, transforming it into a temporary beauty salon. As Keisha sat getting her hair done, she noticed unusual activity through the window. Extra cars were parking near the church across the street, including what looked like a medical van. "That's strange," she said to Lisa. "I don't remember hiring medical staff for the wedding." Lisa, who knew about James's surprise, quickly distracted her. "Let's focus on making you even more beautiful," she said, holding up the gorgeous wedding dress that hung nearby. The dress was a masterpiece of ivory satin and lace, specially designed to flow perfectly whether Keisha was standing or sitting beside James's wheelchair. At the church, James arrived earlier than usual. He needed extra time to prepare for what he was about to do. Dr. Rodriguez and 2 other physical therapists were with him in a private room, helping him get ready. They had been practicing this moment for months, but today it had to be perfect. "Are you sure about this?" Michael asked his brother, watching as the therapists helped James with some stretching exercises. "What if something goes wrong?" James looked at his brother with determination in his eyes. "I've never been more sure of anything," he said. "Keisha deserves this moment." Back at the house, Keisha was almost ready. Her mother helped her into her dress while her aunt stabbed at their eyes with tissues. The dress fit perfectly, and when she put on her grandmother's pearl necklace, or something borrowed and old, she truly looked like a princess. Her father, Reverend Thompson, came into the room and stopped in the doorway, overwhelmed by the sight of his daughter. "My baby girl," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You look just like an angel." Just then, Lisa received a text message from Michael. Everything was ready at the church. The special equipment was in place, hidden from view until the right moment. The medical team was stationed discreetly around the sanctuary. James was prepared and waiting. As the bridal party prepared to leave for the church, Keisha noticed more unusual activity. Through the window, she saw people carrying what looked like medical equipment into the church's side entrance. "Lisa," she said, her brow furrowed with concern. "What's going on? Is James okay?" Lisa squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Everything is perfect," she said. "James is fine. This is your wedding day. Just focus on how much you love each other." The bridesmaids left first, wearing their beautiful blue dresses that matched the sapphire in Keisha's engagement ring. Finally, it was time for Keisha to leave. Her father helped her into the decorated car, being careful not to wrinkle her dress. As they drove the short distance to the church, Keisha's heart was racing. She thought about James, about their journey together, about all the obstacles they had overcome. She had no idea that in less than an hour, she would experience the biggest surprise of her life. Inside the church, James sat in his private room, taking deep breaths to calm his nerves. Everything they had planned and practiced for months was about to happen. Soon, he would give Keisha a wedding gift that would leave everyone speechless. The church was filled with over 200 guests, all waiting eagerly for the ceremony to begin. The decorations were beautiful. White and blue flowers lined the aisle, and the unique chuppah stood at the altar, decorated with both Baptist and Jewish symbols. But what no one except a few trusted people knew was that this wedding was about to become the most talked-about event in town. James sat in his wheelchair at the front of the church, looking handsome in his black tuxedo. His hands were shaking slightly, not from nerves about getting married, but from anticipation of what he was about to do. Dr. Rodriguez stood discreetly near the front row, giving him a small, encouraging nod. The music started, and the bridesmaids began their walk down the aisle. Each of them smiled at James as they passed, some with tears already in their eyes, knowing what was about to happen. Lisa, the maid of honor, was the last before Keisha. As she took her place, she glanced at the hidden equipment behind the first row of pews. Then the wedding march began playing. Everyone stood up and turned towards the doors. They opened slowly, revealing Keisha standing there with her father. She looked breathtaking in her ivory dress, holding a bouquet of white and blue roses. James felt his heart skip a beat when he saw her. Keisha and her father took their first step into the church, but before they could take another, the music suddenly stopped. A murmur of confusion spread through the crowd. Keisha froze, wondering if something had gone wrong. That's when it happened. James pressed a small button on his wheelchair, and two physical therapists quietly moved to his sides. Hidden by the first row of guests, they helped him attach something to his legs, a specially designed mobility device that had been carefully concealed until this moment. Slowly, as everyone watched in amazement, James began to rise from his wheelchair. Gasps filled the church. Keisha's hands flew to her mouth, her bouquet dropping to the floor. Her father caught it just in time. Tears started streaming down her face as she realized what was happening. Using the mobility device and all the strength he had built up through months of secret therapy, James was standing. The device wasn't visible under his pants, making it appear as if he was standing on his own. He was holding onto a specially designed walker that had been disguised as part of the church decorations. "Keisha," he called out, his voice strong and clear despite his effort, "I promised myself that on our wedding day, I would meet you halfway." With the therapist staying close but invisible to most guests, James began to take small, careful steps forward. Each step was a triumph of months of hard work, determination, and love. The church was completely silent except for sounds of crying and whispered prayers. Keisha couldn't move. Her father gently squeezed her arm and whispered, "Go to him, baby." Finally understanding, Keisha picked up her skirts and began walking. Not down the aisle as planned, but meeting James in the middle, just as he had said. Their eyes were locked on each other, both crying now. They met exactly halfway down the aisle. James reached out his hand, trembling slightly from the effort of standing, and Keisha took it. Everyone in the church could see the love shining in their eyes. "I've been practicing this for 6 months," James said softly, so only she could hear. "I wanted to stand beside you as we became husband and wife." Keisha was crying too hard to speak. She just squeezed his hand tighter. Together, they turned to face their guests. Not a single eye in the church was dry. James's mother was sobbing openly, while Keisha's father stood tall, tears running down his proud face. Pastor Michael, who had been in on the surprise, spoke up. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "shall we begin this ceremony right here? I think God has shown us exactly where it should take place." And so, in the middle of the aisle, with James standing tall beside his bride, supported by love, determination, and a little help from modern medicine, they began their wedding ceremony. It wasn't what anyone had expected, but it was more beautiful than anyone could have imagined. The biggest surprise of Keisha's life had turned into a moment that would inspire everyone who witnessed it, proving that with enough love and determination, miracles can happen. The ceremony that followed was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. James and Keisha stood together in the middle of the church aisle, their love story now even more extraordinary than before. Dr. Rodriguez and his team stayed close, making sure James remained stable and comfortable throughout the ceremony. Pastor Michael began the service with tears in his eyes. "Today," he said, his voice carrying through the church, "we are witnessing not just the union of two people, but the power of love to overcome any obstacle." He then invited Rabbi Cohen, James's family rabbi, to join him in performing the ceremony, bringing together both their faiths in this special moment. The couple had written their own vows. James went first, his voice strong despite the effort of standing. "Keisha," he began, "when I first met you, I was a man who thought his biggest adventures were behind him, but you showed me that life's greatest journey was just beginning. Today, I stand here because of your love, which made me believe that anything is possible." Keisha could barely speak through her tears, but her words came straight from her heart. "James, you've shown me what true strength looks like. Not just today, but every day since I met you. I promise to be your partner in all things, to face every challenge by your side, and to love you more with each passing day." As they exchanged rings, a gospel choir began to sing softly. The gold bands they chose had both English and Hebrew inscriptions inside. "Love knows no bounds" in English and "Anai el dodi the dodai lie, I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine" in Hebrew. Then came the moment for the Jewish tradition of breaking the glass. Instead of placing it at James's feet as usual, Rabbi Cohen held it at the perfect height for James to break it with a small hammer. When the glass shattered, the entire congregation shouted Mazel Tov, followed by joyful amens from Keisha's Baptist family members. Throughout the ceremony, James remained standing, though those closest could see the effort it took. Keisha held his hand tightly, supporting him just as he had always supported her. The medical team stayed vigilant but discreet, ensuring everything went smoothly. When Pastor Michael and Rabbi Cohen finally pronounced them husband and wife, James turned to Keisha with a sparkle in his eye. "May I kiss my bride?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. The church erupted in laughter and applause as they shared their first kiss as a married couple. But James had one more surprise. Instead of returning to his wheelchair, he whispered to Keisha, "Let's walk out together." Dr. Rodriguez gave a slight nod, indicating it was safe to proceed. And so, with small but determined steps, James and Keisha began their first walk as husband and wife. The wedding march played again as they moved slowly down the aisle. Guests reached out to touch them, blessing them, crying with joy. James's mother was sobbing openly, while Keisha's father stood proud and tall, tears streaming down his face. Near the church doors, James finally had to stop. He was exhausted but happy. Dr. Rodriguez brought his wheelchair forward, and with help, James sat down. But instead of letting Keisha walk beside him, he patted his lap with a grin. Without hesitation, Keisha sat carefully on his lap, her wedding dress flowing around them both. Together, they wheeled out of the church to thunderous applause and cheers. Outside, rose petals rained down on them as their families and friends celebrated. News photographers who had gathered outside, having heard rumors of something special, captured the moment for the next day's papers. As they posed for pictures, James looked up at his new wife. "I'm sorry I couldn't walk the whole way," he said softly. Keisha leaned down and kissed him. "Don't you dare apologize," she whispered. "You've given me the most beautiful gift anyone could ever receive, your trust, your love, and a miracle I'll never forget." Later, as guests began heading to the reception, Rabbi Cohen approached them. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "in all my years of performing weddings, I'd never seen a more perfect demonstration of what marriage should be. Two people supporting each other, making the impossible possible through love." The day wasn't over yet. At the reception, James and Keisha would share another special moment that would show everyone that their love story was just beginning. The wedding reception was held in the grand ballroom of the City Hotel, which had been transformed into a magical space that perfectly blended both their cultures. Blue and white flowers decorated every table, and both kosher and soul food stations offered guests a taste of both families' traditions. As guests filed in, they couldn't stop talking about what they had witnessed at the church. Many were still wiping tears from their eyes, sharing videos they had recorded on their phones. The local news had already picked up the story, and reporters waited outside, hoping to interview the couple who had shown the world what true love looks like. James and Keisha made their grand entrance in a special way. Instead of James staying in his wheelchair, they had arranged for 2 comfortable chairs to be brought to the center of the dance floor. As the DJ announced Mr. and Mrs. Davidson, they came in with James in his wheelchair, but then both sat in the chairs facing each other. The song At Last by Etta James began to play, the same song from their proposal. As the music filled the room, they held hands and moved their chairs in a slow, graceful dance that they had practiced for weeks. Their first dance as husband and wife wasn't traditional, but it was uniquely beautiful, showing everyone that love doesn't need to follow any rules. During dinner, James's brother Michael stood up to give his best man speech. When James first told me he was going to stand at his wedding, he said, his voice shaking with emotion, I thought he was crazy. But my brother taught me something today. With enough love and determination, miracles really do happen. Lisa's maid of honor speech brought more tears to everyone's eyes. Keisha called me the day she met James, she remembered. She said, Lisa, I just met someone special. She didn't mention his wheelchair until I asked what he looked like. That's when I knew their love was real, because she saw James for who he was, not what he sat in. The evening was full of beautiful moments. James' mother danced with him while he sat in his wheelchair, no longer worried about his future because she had seen the strength of his and Keisha's love. Keisha's father held his daughter close during their dance, whispering, I'm so proud of you, baby girl. You saw with your heart, and it led you to a wonderful man. But the biggest surprise came when it was time to cut the cake. James had been resting in his wheelchair, conserving his strength. As they approached the cake table, he whispered something to Dr. Rodriguez, who quickly came to his side with the mobility device. Once again, James stood up, this time to gasp from the guests who hadn't been at the ceremony. Together, he and Keisha cut their beautiful cake, which had been decorated with both Baptist and Jewish symbols. They fed each other pieces, laughing as they deliberately smeared a bit of frosting on each other's noses. Near the end of the night, Rabbi Cohen and Pastor Michael jointly gave a special blessing to the couple. Today, Pastor Michael said, We've witnessed a love that breaks down all barriers of faith, of physical limitations, of society's expectations. Rabbi Cohen added, In the Jewish tradition, we say that when 2 souls find each other, they create light in the world. James and Keisha, you have created enough light today to brighten the whole world. As the reception came to an end, guests began to leave, each one stopping to hug the couple and share how their love story had touched them. A young girl in a wheelchair told Keisha, You've shown me that I can find love too. An older interracial couple thanked them for showing that love knows no boundaries. The next day, their story was in all the local papers and had even been picked up by national news. The headlines read, Love Stands Strong, Groom Surprises Bride by Standing at Wedding, and Modern Day Miracle, a wedding that broke all barriers. But James and Keisha barely noticed the publicity. They were too busy beginning their new life together. James continued his therapy, growing stronger each day. Keisha started a foundation to help other couples facing similar challenges. Together, they began giving talks at schools and churches about love, acceptance, and the power of believing in miracles. Their wedding day had been just the beginning. Their love story would go on to inspire thousands, showing the world that true love doesn't see limitations, it sees possibilities.